tried the love languages. We tried date nights. We scheduled everything that the relationship books. I read everything that I could, and nothing just seemed to be making any difference in our relationship.
What is it that you feel is most challenging in terms of supporting someone with trauma? And what were the first telltale signs?
I took it all on, and I think a lot of partners do. But when you can start to realize that it's really a trauma, it's not about you.
But it does start with you. So I do think that it's just beautiful to touch on that. Welcome to Mindfully Sovereign, the podcast that invites you to reclaim your feminine self-authority and unleash the abundance within. My name is Sapha, I am your host, and I'm here to help guide you past your limiting beliefs and into the heart of your unwavering and undeniable power. This podcast is all about reclaiming your feminine self-authority, learning the art of self-seduction, and awakening your inner goddess so that you can become an aligned match to your most abundant life yet. So grab a cup of tea, get cozy, and get ready to become mindfully sovereign. All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. And I have another amazing guest for us today. Her name is Danielle Sebastian. And I cannot wait for you guys to meet her. So, without further ado, Danielle, can you please introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself and the amazing work that you do?
Of course, I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. I was really excited for today. So, I am Danielle Sebastian, and I have found myself in the position of being someone who helps other partners who are in a struggling marriage to someone who has survived childhood trauma. And my story really started, it was 8 years ago when I was in the midst of a struggling marriage. We just seemed to have a bunch of things that just kept coming up, and we just kept hitting brick walls. We were trying everything. We tried the love languages. We tried date nights. We scheduled everything that the relationship books. I read everything that I could, and nothing just seemed to be making any difference in our relationship. And it was really like I was walking on eggshells all the time. It
Mm.
was very unpredictable. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't know when something I would say would end up really being escalated into a big issue. And it was only when I'd had enough that my husband was able to reveal for the first time to anyone a terrible history of childhood abuse at the hands of the church.
Oh,
And I just knew instinctively that that was that thing, that puzzle piece that I just needed to put in the puzzle that would allow us to finally break through and make some real changes in our relationship.
absolutely. It's so interesting as someone with real like trauma as well on my end to hear that reflected and just to know that the way that we express ourselves, especially because a lot of the time everything is coming from a place of subconscious existence, right? We're not aware of this. It's driving it's behind the wheel and it's affecting the people in our lives, especially when there is that capacity for intimacy and connection and for growth and that way of holding one another and supporting one another. So I think that I would love to know a little bit more about what is it that you feel is most challenging in terms of supporting someone with trauma, and what were the first telltale signs? I know he told you eventually, but what was the thing that was really driving, the conversation, and what allowed him to open up to you? I think it's like 5 questions at once, sorry.
Yes. So the first thing that I started noticing, and it was really early on in our relationship when I look back at dating, there
Mhm.
were quite a few signs that I would love to let people know about.
Yeah.
So that they're like, oh, okay, maybe there is something going on here. And number one is just that he didn't want to talk about childhood. So makes sense, right? But I did not put those pieces together. Things every time we would talk about childhood, it would be like, oh, I don't really remember much about
The
my
shutdown.
childhood.
Mm.
Oh, it was fine. Just it was just completely nothing would come of a relationship talking about being a kid. So that was really interesting looking back and being like, oh, that's it. The other thing that I didn't put my finger on initially, but was a big sign was controlling. the
Mm.
relationship dynamics, or in some cases, their environment. And so things like they would want to control how often we saw each other, where we spent the night, what we did, how close you got. All of those things are another telltale sign that I just didn't put my finger on.
Mhm.
Obviously, then the pushing away. So just when you get close, just when you feel like you're making a breakthrough, there's really a sabotaging of the relationship. It's more than just pushing away. Oh, I think, we're moving too quickly. It's really sabotaging the
Mhm.
relationship. And then there was the emotional reaction, the lashing out at things that other couples could say to each other that
Mhm.
seemed to cause just an unreasonable amount of stress in the relationship.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note the distinction in that space of control, how it was more for self-protection,
Yes,
and it wasn't so much about, like, keeping you underfoot. I say
yes.
that just having as being someone who left a toxic relationship for other reasons, that, like, the other shoe fit more in that space, but this is, like, so interesting to know. No, this is, like, for self-protection. Like, the way that someone can sometimes make themselves feel better when they've experienced trauma, especially trauma that hits so close to the heart and to the soul and just in so many different areas of our physical body as everything gets integrated in a somatic way. The way that we can sometimes feel safest is to say, okay, but like only I can touch you, or only I can do this, or I'm the one that gets to choose where we're going to go because I don't want to be blindsided and be like ambushed or something. So I love that you're able to share that and to say, like, all of these things were factors that we didn't even think about. Like maybe you, like you said, you read the books and you're like, okay, this is like an avoidant attachment or whatever. But like going beyond just a nomenclature, like going beyond just, oh, this is a name for a thing that we think that could be happening, and actually sitting down and having the conversation in the heart to heart of, can I support you? And how did that change the dynamic for you guys?
Oh, it was everything because I was taking everything on as the partner. I was thinking it was me. I was thinking I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy of the love, that the control was my fault, that I was pushing too much, trying to get too close too fast. Everything was me. And that's just kind of how it goes, right? I took it all on. And I think a lot of partners do. But when you can start to realize that it's really a trauma, it's not about you,
Mhm.
so freeing, so empowering, and allows you to have better conversations and bring the emotions back to what the real issue is. And that's that these trauma responses that were adaptive for him to survive his childhood. You're right. The control is about him feeling safe. And he had no control over anything as a child. So that was a mechanism he used that made him able to survive it. In an adult relationship, sometimes they don't work as well. And so being able to adapt those to have a healthier relationship was critical.
Absolutely, and keeping yourself in integrity with yourself and reminding yourself, like you said, it's not your fault. I think a lot
Yeah.
of times in general, not just in relationships, but in our lives, we do tend to believe everything and anything that is happening is because of us, right? And
Yep.
there is this really beautiful dynamic. I always say there's this dichotomy. On the one hand, we are so beyond powerful that we could create universes if we wanted to, right? And then at the
Yep.
same time, we are not powerful enough. Like in other words, it's not always about you. And also too, everyone, although we are the main star and the main character in our lives, the other person is also the main character in theirs. And that means that not always does this really have to do with you. It has to do with their lived experience, their ideas, their wounds, their healing, the things that they're maybe avoiding, the things that they don't know how to sink into. And it's not because you're not good enough, not because you're not perfect enough, not because you're not giving enough of yourself. And there's so much importance to decoding that, especially as we support ourselves, because, and I actually would like to make that a question. Did you find in the process of discovering this and supporting him that there was a shift in how you saw and supported yourself as maybe the ultimate important piece of the puzzle?
Oh, absolutely. I had to completely re envision my idea of being able to support him, which was I was giving everything. my needs were on the back burner. I was doing everything I could for him. He was the full focus. And what I realized eventually when you hit rock bottom really is that by me not taking care of myself, by me not getting the support that I needed, I was actually making things worse because despite my best intentions to change my communication style, to be more empathetic to what was going on, if I was exhausted, burned out, resentful, that I was more reactive and couldn't really do the things that I knew that I needed to do.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's such an important piece to the puzzle, especially for I mean, obviously, I work in the world of the feminine, so I speak a lot to women, but for us women who've been taught essentially that we have to give of ourselves continuously no matter what, and that everyone else around us gets priority in our lives. And so if you are someone who is listening to this and you often relate to yourself in this regard and you think you are the only one who everyone can depend on and it's up to you to look at after everybody's well-being and you end up putting yourself in the back of everything and dead last, it takes its toll, not just for you but for the people in your life. And it takes such a heavy toll because it leaves you depleted, and at the end of the day you need to be fully filled, fully replenished, right, but like fully filled in order to have the capacity to hold space for the people in your life the way that you want to. But it does start with you. So I do think that it's just beautiful to touch on that for anyone who's listening who's been in the role of caregiver in one way or another. And I think a lot of us fall there just by virtue of how society brings us up or whatever. But like we fall in that pattern without noticing that we are important ourselves to ourselves as well. Yeah, so thank you for that. I also would love to know a little bit more. You spoke a little bit earlier about showing up for yourself and finding ways to like regulate. Basically, you didn't use that word, but I'm going to use the word
Yes,
regulate. Self regulation is so important. So, can we talk a little bit about that?
yes. Self regulation, taking care of yourself. What I had always envisioned taking care of myself was going on a spa vacation or doing a full spa day or leaving, on vacation and going to a cabin in the woods or something like that. I had to change my view on that. And it ended up being those small things that I did every day that made all the difference in the world. It does not have to look like this big thing that you have to schedule. It's 5 minutes a day of those. I had these top five things that I knew that would keep me healthy and recharged. And I put them on the top of my calendar, and they could take less than 5 to 10 minutes a day. And if I did those things, I felt better. End of story. So that's essentially what I still adhere to, and I recommend to others as well.
Absolutely. I love that. It's the care of the self. And I laughed when you said that because I think a lot of us do think of self-care as
Yeah.
bubble baths.
Hmm.
And
Uh huh.
it's not. I
No.
mean, it can be a part of the
Yes.
conversation,
Love
right?
my spa days. I am not knocking spa weekends. I'm not. But when you're in survival mode, it's those things that you can do on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And from your side, right? What was the first thing or number one space that you were able to really lean into when you realized, okay, this is what's coming up. Then I'm going to take care of myself, right? And how were you able to then show up for someone who had been in a space of trauma for so long in their lives as well?
Once I could, once I had the support I needed, and I kind of want to touch on the support as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, please.
is that I had to also give up the fact that I couldn't fix this myself and we couldn't fix it together. And there was a lot of pressure, and I think there's a lot of pressure on spouses to keep this a secret because it is a secret, right? It's
Mhm.
usually not something that the trauma survivors like, yeah, go ahead and tell your friends about this, get the
Mm.
support you need. There was a lot of pressure on that. So I did have to have a conversation with my husband. I'm really struggling here. I need my friends and family, or I need a safe space where I can be real with people and let them know how much I'm struggling. And I'm really recommend you have that conversation because of the privacy issues with this, but it can be done. And so sitting down and being like, who would you be okay
Mhm.
with me sharing? Not the gritty details, but just how much I'm struggling. And usually there's one or two family members that your husband feels comfortable with you sharing. And if not, then maybe it's a counselor and someone who is completely outside of it. So taking care of myself and then getting additional support for the relationship and the trauma recovery was important. And then it was all about me figuring out how we could communicate in a healthier way, creating and getting in on that pattern of, where we were just defensive and distrust and all these things. What could I do to change that pattern?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm excited you brought that up because that was my next question. And it's exactly what communication strategies are most effective for couples where one partner has experienced severe trauma like this.
Yes. So we've already spoken a little bit about how our instinct is, especially as women, to try and make it better, right? This is going to be counterintuitive, but one of the first things that I recommend when those heightened emotions come up, essentially it's a trauma trigger. So something as simple as, hey, babe, would you mind putting the dishes away tonight after dinner? I'm exhausted. Because the trauma survivor is so in tune to signs of danger, they will see danger when it's not there. And so they often will take some of those comments as a personal affront to their character, that they're a bad person or a bad husband or a bad father, when that isn't the case at all. And so what I've found is when those heightened emotions happen, it's actually best to just disengage, because our instinct is to, oh, no, no, I'll do it. Don't worry. I didn't mean it that way. But it kind of continues this pattern where somebody else is to blame, when really what it is it's that trauma response that's
Hmm.
coming up. And so if you can disengage, take a few moments, take a day, take 2 days if you have to, then come back to the conversation and say, hey, I think there's something going on there. When that happens, then you can have a real truthful conversation and start to create different patterns.
Mhm. I love that. And I think that this circles back a little bit to the idea of regulation. So, if anyone
Yes.
is listening and doesn't know what regulation is in terms of your nervous system, right? This is a way for you to get back into a space of rest and digest, right? This is what we talk about when we say, hey, it's somatic healing, meaning your body remembers every single thing that you've experienced mentally, right? Your body remembers in a physical way. And so sometimes information will get stuck in the body. And so one of the ways, and we can regulate, in other words, bring ourselves back into a state of homeostasis, is by understanding there's many tools, but one of the ways that we can do this is by understanding that we can create space for ourselves where we can process whatever it is that we are feeling without allowing the feeling to overtake us completely and run rampant and therefore trigger the nervous system, put us in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, and allow us the space to heal. And again, that's where that word, think about it, regulate, like we're coming back to center. And so I love that you say that, because particularly where romantic relationships are concerned, and especially when it comes to marriages, we've been taught sort of the opposite, right? It's like
Yes.
never go to sleep angry, always
Never
address
go to bed
everything.
mad. Oh, when you're talking about trauma responses, that is the number one thing I would tell people to throw out the window.
Ugh, I completely agree. I don't know
Mm,
where this became like a pattern that we thought would be useful. I
mm.
don't know if it had to do with the fact that we as humans don't like being uncomfortable, and therefore we
Yeah,
figured this would be like a way of long lasting longevity in the relationship or what. But yes, I can also attest to the fact that that does not always, where that push to try to fix something in the moment, or that push to try to have a conversation, not just in marriages, but like in friendships and with your family
everything,
and everything. Just
everywhere. Yeah,
let it breathe. Nothing wrong with letting something breathe.
yeah. There is nothing that needs to be done with that dish right now that can come 5 days from now. Right? It's not about that. It's about having the conversation when you are both ready.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of your own communication, I guess, and how that builds intimacy in a relationship, right? In terms of that, what were some of the most effective tools that you could use? Say, if we've already kind of spoken about one, okay, distance. We don't have to address this right away. What are some of the other tools that you would recommend?
Mhm. The knowing again that trauma, that the trauma brain is looking for danger, how you phrase the conversation and how you start it is really important. So most of the time I recommend that you start the conversation with, hey, I'd love to talk about what happened the other night and see if we could do it differently next time. That seems to be just my common thing that I recommend that people start with, because it doesn't put anybody on the defensive. So, and you're also getting permission to talk about it, right? And then if
Mhm.
that person isn't ready to talk about it, then you need to be okay with waiting. That doesn't mean you don't come back to it, because it's really important to come back to those conversations. But that seems to be a really great way to diffuse and put everybody on the same level, right? The same page. That's
Mhm.
one.
Yeah,
Do
go
you have any
ahead.
comments on that?
No, I was just gonna say, and not to
On that?
circle back to this because,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the same thing. But again, if
Mm-hmm.
also too when the person tests no, that's also not about you. It's about the person.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to have that mindful sovereignty, that power of will, of personal self-assurance to know, hey, I really legitimately do want to know, can you receive this feedback right now? Can we have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation about this? If the answer is no, then it's not about you. And you can have the fortitude to be like, yeah, okay, cool.
You're so right, because it is kind of hard. But once you can get there, then you're like, okay, he's not ready, not because of me, not because he doesn't want to have the conversation. Just that it's not a great time, not ready yet, hasn't processed. Absolutely. And my other big tip is to go for a walk.
I like
I
that.
love walking it out, because there's just something about being outside if you can. I live in Montana, so sometimes the winters are a little tough on this one, but I love to take a walk, because, and it also seems like you're just walking together. You're not staring at each other's eyes, where it can
Mhm.
feel to the survivor, the trauma survivor that you're, interrogating. It just seems to be the best conversations that I have are when we are able to take a walk or get outside or even just sit outside.
Yeah, there's something so beautiful, again, not to keep repeating, but about the somatics of that, because your body
Mm-hmm.
is in movement. There's
Mm-hmm.
such a deep medicine in combining all of the aspects of self, your mind, your body, your heart, your spirit into an activity. And when it comes to this sort of thing, I think that's why I laugh when I tell people when we work one-on-one, if we do shadow work, a lot of times I'll have people get up and shake and move and
Yes.
dance and do things that are more moving the energy out of just here, because it is not just there, it's in their bodies too. And so
Mm-hmm.
in this space, when you're relational to someone, sometimes you really do need that breather and to let the body move as you are moving. It gives your body a permission to exist without feeling like you're in this aquarium, right? Or in this container where everything needs to be stiff and everything needs to be
We're
rigid and
having
it
a
be
deep
perfect.
conversation. We have to have a deep conversation right now. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be relaxed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. And same, like in that same vein, what what do you do in terms of like setting healthy boundaries? And that, because part of that to me is okay, so now we've got the conversation going, we've got intimacy building, we're learning how to move our bodies when we're in all of these situations, and boundaries are going to be needing to be reestablished from a place that is going to be very different than it was before for both parties.
This is the one that I say that if you are married to someone who is a trauma survivor, you're going to have to get good at setting boundaries. That's the fourth step, really, is that you do have to start setting boundaries. So when the conversation is going awry, it is perfectly fine to say, hey, you know what? If the conversation keeps going this way, then I'm gonna have to leave this situation. I'm gonna have to go. So really, it's about putting those boundaries in place. And I also had to realize, and actually, I listened to your podcast on boundaries, and it's so true that boundaries are about keeping people in
Mhm.
and not out.
Mhm.
And once I realized that, that made it so much easier for me to set boundaries, because I realized that I didn't want my husband or partner out. I wanted him in. And so that was a really beautiful part of the mindset of what a boundary is.
Mhm. Yeah, it's an intimacy builder. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be this division. In fact, it's actually doing the opposite. It's a way to break down those walls and operate within each other's space in a way that feels healthy and sustainable. And then it gets to change and evolve over time. So, in that same vein, What have been some of the biggest changes that you've experienced, and how have you allowed yourself to lean into them as they've been showing up in this healing journey?
Yeah, I would say that definitely the separating myself from the trauma responses and giving myself that that vision back of, okay, I am a good mom. I am a good wife. I'm not putting too many things on this, and I do deserve to also be in a relationship that I'm happy, and that you should be on a journey with someone and not be their journey. That was probably my biggest takeaway, is that it just gets really heavy and burdensome, and you can have a relationship where you're both happy, and you're both equals, and you're both supporting each other.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way that you phrase that because it's true. I
Mhm.
always said this as I was leaving my own toxic marriage and opening up myself for the possibility of being with someone, which I really was just happy being by myself. But as I was opening up, I was like, if anything was
Mhm.
ever going to be anything, it would have to be a partnership.
Mhm.
Because you're right, it's not about you as a person becoming the journey. It's you're going on this journey with the other person. And the beautiful thing about that is you get to watch the other person grow and
Mhm.
shift and change and be a different version of who they are every single day. Same with you. You get to be a
Mhm.
very different version of who you are every single day, and you get to share in that together. And that sharing creates even more intimacy, and it allows for deeper conversations, and it allows for the space to ask and receive, right? Because that's the thing too, is at this point, I think it's interesting when we get into this conversation, maybe a lot of people are like, okay, the support goes to the partner that has the trauma. And yet we've
Mhm.
already established that the support comes in this way first. And it's important to be in relation to self. And so in that regard, as you've been growing and transitioning and learning, what have been some of the biggest lessons? What have been some of the biggest shifts for yourself within yourself that you've come across that you've really enjoyed?
The thing that I have enjoyed the most is being able to have the conversations with my husband that I would have tried to protect him from in the past.
Mm,
We had this particular situation where our our daughter, we got an interesting phone call, about a coach, that there might have been some text messages or something that was interesting, and I just knew immediately. And for some reason, I received the phone call, and I just knew, oh, this is going to be triggering, right? And I didn't know what to do with that information, whether I should just try and fix it myself, deal with it with my daughter on my own. But I realized, I'm like, no, I think we're ready. I think
mm,
that we can tackle this head on together instead of separately. And I ended up calling him that night. I was traveling, and I called him, and I just said, hey, I'm going to talk about something that's going to be hard for you, but I'd really like to be able to work on it together. And when I did, 100%, it brought up a lot of those emotions, but we were able to talk about them, and we dealt with it perfectly together as a couple. And that was when I really knew that I'd probably been keeping a lot of things from him that he can handle now. He can handle just fine. And that was really eye opening.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful way for you to give yourself the space to be held as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because imagine, you know, having the expectation that we are the only ones again that get to hold everything for everyone all the time to include ourselves is just so far removed from reality. Like having to hold the whole of this human experience on your own two shoulders without having that support is so challenging, and being able to share that with someone that you're in a life path with is vital, because then you are able to have these conversations. And I think that that's a beautiful shift, a beautiful transition in your dynamic, but also a beautiful transition for you, because I think it gives you the ability to see strength and potency where there might have been fear before. And I think that that speaks a lot to the alchemy that we have within ourselves, and how we can transform, and that there's nothing wrong with the uncomfortable, painful, horrible moments of life, and that we have the capacity to sit in them and move beyond them and work with them, even as our own sort of like extra partners that we get to walk this life with.
It was really nice to be able to have myself be open, like you said, to getting the help that I needed, that I would have normally been like, I need to do this myself. And the fact of the matter is that I don't need to do it all by myself, and we can do it together.
Yeah. And as a human being, just like holding the expression of all of that, especially because I think when we love someone and we know that they've been hurt, we hurt as well. And it's this really interesting dynamic and this really interesting invitation and opportunity for us to also be vulnerable with ourselves. So, in this journey, what has been your connection to your own vulnerability and what has been your own access point in terms of allowing that honest and open conversation with yourself to be like, okay, this is what's showing up for me as well. And I want to share this with you. What has that been like?
Writing my story was my first dip into this, that it was very hard for me. And I just, in general, and not someone who shows my vulnerable side, except to people I'm really, really close to. And so going back and doing that work and wanting it to be a real picture, we wanted it to be real and raw and really paint the picture of what it looks like. That was really hard. That was my first dip into it. And then as we started to tell the story, I tend to like to make it very clinical. So, oh, you do this step, you do this step, you do this step. But people want to hear the story. They want to hear the vulnerability. They want to learn that my friends were mad at me because they didn't know how hard it was for me during that time period, and that they could have been a bigger support if I would have let them in.
Mhm. Yeah, I can completely understand that. Just as a general point of connection to the idea of vulnerability in our lives, and then we talked about this in a previous episode, but vulnerability is this beautiful sweet and sour superpower that it's just
Mhm.
like it gives us the ability to hold the fullness of who we are in presence and authenticity and power. And it can be very scary because that means everything, warts and all. And not everyone gets to receive that part of us either. So I think that's the beautiful balance between yes, okay, we get to be vulnerable, but and also it's true, not everyone gets to see the side of us. And yet when we do, and when we open the door to possibility, especially when we have the support systems around us, which are also very important. And you touched on this a little bit earlier too. And I love this, having that the friends or the safe space that you could create for yourself, the family members, the friends, the rooms, the therapists, the people that you could surround yourself with that could lend you their fortitude, much like you were lending your own self your fortitude, plus lending it to your husband, plus your kid, and like everything that was happening in your world at the same time is so vital. Yeah, I love
Mhm.
that.
I would just sit, with my counselor, and she just let me cry, because she's like, "This is really hard." And I was like, I'm not admitting that to anyone, but yes. Oh, it was it was really nice to have someone doing that for me.
Mhm. Yeah, it's important for us to have that too. And like you said, sometimes we don't want to admit to ourselves or to the world how hard it is.
No. And I work with a lot of wives who are like, I can't believe I can't fix this. I'm so mad at myself that I can't fix this. It's okay. That's why we have a group of people. That's why we have communities. That's why we have people that tell their stories, is because we can't do it all.
Mhm. And it's important to demystify that a little bit as well, because one of the things that I've found in working with people who've left or are in the process of leaving relationships, and I say that because obviously, I mean, I've done it. So I walk the path that, that I've experienced with them. One of
Yeah.
the things that I come across most often, and I would love to know if this is kind of something you've experienced as well, and to what degree, is one of the things that I see most often is this deep, deep seated shame
Yeah.
and sense of self failure and perceived, oh, I'm such a failure.
Yeah. And it's so funny because we just those communication techniques I use, people are, I can't believe I just didn't figure this out on my own. And then they're almost beating themselves up, really,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
not having made those switches on their own. And it makes me so sad because that it's not intuitive, and it's just these little things that other people can help you with that make a big difference, and it has nothing to do with us with us, with us not being good enough or figuring it out. So I see that quite a bit initially at first, and then people are ultimately able to be like, okay, yeah, no, it's okay, and it's not all about me. So
Yeah, I love that. So tell me a little bit more about your work too, right? What does that look like, this experience that you bring to people?
absolutely. So I have a survivor's playbook for partners. So that is the first thing I want people to know. And these are the steps that, looking back, I wish someone would have told me back then would change our relationship. So I put those down on a piece of paper, and so that is available. And then I also work with people. I have a group membership and one-on-one, a 12-week program to walk people through all the steps that I used to get to a healthier relationship.
I love that. What is the group space like? I'm so curious.
It's brand new. I'm so excited. So I was looking for a community everywhere. I looked for people who were in the same situation absolutely everywhere and couldn't find it. So it has been my dream to be able to get spouses together in a safe space, as we talked about, who are all going through the same thing. So I just started this membership. If anybody is interested on getting in on the ground level, I would love it. So we have this wonderful group of people. We get together weekly. We have monthly themes. We bring resources and books and guides, anything that we can that would help people through this situation.
I love that so, so much. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so before I let you go,
Okay.
I always ask people what you think, what makes a mindfully sovereign lived experience? How would you live mindfully sovereign?
Mindfully sovereign. That is such a great thing. I personally, with my experience, have found that being mindfully sovereign is not necessarily looking at what everybody else would do or what you think that everybody else's relationship makes healthy. It's about what works for you. And when you can put aside that people may think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they do that and that makes them happy. When you can put that aside and be like, this works for us and own it fully and move forward, to me, that is my biggest definition.
I love that so much. Beautiful. Okay, and also before I let you go, where can people find you? All of your information will be on the notes as well, but just
Yep.
good to have them
My
there.
website, 100%. So www.daniellesebastian.com.
Love it. Danielle, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today.
That was amazing. I love that conversation.